Hello, friends. This is .org, episode 16, the podcast all about how nonprofits tell their stories. I'm your host, Matt Pearl. I was a broadcast journalist, a TV news reporter for 20 years. Now I run Pearl Impact Media, where I craft videos for nonprofits that get used and remembered. In addition to that, I also host this podcast where we help you build your nonprofit's storytelling strategy. We are 16 episodes in and we're breaking new ground. 2 guests today. A special moment for a special subject, ethical storytelling, and how we protect our clients while advocating and fundraising for our organizations. My 2 guests today do this exactly through their work with YWCA of Southern Arizona. In the Tucson area, she is the CEO. He is the founder of For the Hood. Magdalena Verdugo and Frank Velásquez, welcome to .org.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Happy to have you both. Question number 1, and it's always the toughest. I'm going to have each of you tell me about who you represent in 30 seconds or less. Magdalena, we'll start with you. Tell us about the why.
Well, as you mentioned, I'm the CEO of the YWCA. We've been in Tucson for over 109 years, serving our community. I always say that we're on a mission of eliminating racism and empowering women. And we do this through direct service, providing direct service, and through what we're going to speak to today is storytelling, sharing our stories.
Mm-hmm. All right. And Frank, you're up. In 30 seconds or less, tell us about For the Hood.
Well, if you go to my website, the tagline's right there. It says, if you got a story to tell, we got you. So what we do is we help organizations and individuals reclaim their narratives so that they can lead with more authenticity, courage, and unapologetic joy.
Beautiful. And Frank, you and I, we've known each other for a bit now, and we were just kind of having a chat over Google Meet a couple months back, and we were talking about the various things that we like to talk about, and I was mentioning my podcast and the things that we tend to cover, and you very quickly came back with Magdalena for the podcast and recommended that we interview her and you together, and specifically for this topic. So before we dive in, I would love for you to share a little bit about why this topic is so necessary for nonprofits, no matter what stage they're in, and what made you think of Magdalena and her team's work at the Y.
Yeah, great. So great question. I think I want to start where storytelling is so important. How the stories are told, especially through the lens of the client, is critical. I've made tons of mistakes in my lifetime, or at least in my career in the nonprofits, where how we tell stories, how the clients tell their own stories is critical. And so, as Magda said earlier, their mission is to empower women, to eliminate racism. And so that storytelling is so critical. And just the way that I've seen the YWCA work with their women and their families, not just in their storytelling, but just how they help them shape their businesses is incredible. So it was a natural thought to think, oh yeah, we need to get Magdalena and talk a little bit about what the YWCA of Southern Arizona does.
And Magdalena, how would you describe your team's approach to storytelling? Where does it best show itself in terms of that approach?
Storytelling for us, when I think of storytelling, it's really a collaboration, a partnership. It's a partnership with our participants, the individuals telling their story. For us, it's about not telling stories about portraying people that are broken or helpless. It's really focused on resilience, self-efficacy, leadership, growth, the possibility, right, of what they've experienced. So I want to believe, approach it very natural because the stories, when we open ourselves up to our participants, the stories just kind of flow in because our participants get to a point where they're excited to share the progress that they've made and to share how far they've come along. And so our team has been trained. I always say trauma-informed, trained to be able to listen and take in those stories. And We don't always use them. We have different ways that we use our stories or the format that we use our stories. Um, but we keep them and we hold them um, until we find that our participants are ready to share.
Magdalena, the upcoming episode of .org that we've got lined up after yours is all about building a storytelling culture within your organization. And I speak with the executive director of a nonprofit where I am here in Atlanta all about that. And I don't want to steal too much of that thunder, but I think what you just said makes me want to ask you about the process of building what you've built there, because you talked about training your team. You talked about participants really being excited to share their stories, where I'm sure that wasn't always the case. How did you get to that point, and how did you build that culture both within your team and among your participants and your clients?
By sharing my story,
Mm,
by being very transparent with my experiences. Um, there's some excitement when I say I work at the YWCA or I represent the YWCA or the CEO of the YWCA and really honing in on our mission of eliminating racism and empowering women. And so there's a reason, there's a passion there for me as to why I sit in that space. And so I think that when we open ourselves up genuinely um, and share our values, we start aligning ourselves with individuals that hold the same values, the same perspective, and build that trust. I think that's the biggest thing. It's setting and building trust with our participants and with our team because not all of us, I don't think we recognize sometimes that we're storytellers. When we share whatever we share, whether it's with our family and with our friends, the most of the time we're storytellers. And and I think one of the biggest things is to acknowledge that we're storytellers and accepting and embracing that. And then with our teams, it's really getting them in a point that storytelling is really not about telling people what to do or how could I say, or having a list of steps of like, this is what you're going to follow, but it's simply just pausing and listening,
mm,
just listening. And then that's why I'm saying like they come to us as individuals or participants, whether it's through our Women's Business Center or through our Y Works, which is our workforce readiness program. Um, our women come in and at the inception, they may not know they have a story to share. They just know that at this moment in time, they have a need and that
mm.
we're going to work together to meet that need for them. The stories come later once we start building that trust and that foundation and we start sharing and they start hearing themselves what got us to where we're at.
Mm. I love to hear that. I'd love to hear from you too, just what those stories end up looking like. Is it donor communication? Is it email blasts? Is it social media posts? Is it video? Is it written? Is it photography? Um, what does the final product look like for your storytelling?
Oh my God, all of it, everything that you mentioned. I think that one of the things we started doing a couple of years ago was holding these graduations, I'll call them, or ceremonies for all of our participants that go through our programming. And that's a point also where they get to share. If they're at a point where they can share, because one of the biggest things too is we need to create a place, a safe place for them to be able to share their story. So in addition to trust, it's safe, because sometimes we work with survivors and we don't want to jeopardize their safety and sometimes sharing their story,
Yeah.
whether it's in print or verbally, could jeopardize their safety. So we're very thoughtful and mindful of that. And so we only take and put stories, and I'll say stories publicly when our participants are ready to share that story. We will never post a story without the individual or participant reading that story. I
Mm,
recently did a newsletter and in reference to International Women's Day. And we named about 4 women. One of them was our internal employee. And so we highlighted women's stories of resiliency, self efficacy, and celebration, right? Of growth and so forth. We didn't go to print through the newsletter until each of those individuals got to read what we put together. Because the way that it happened is I interview in some cases, I listen, and then I write it, and
Mm.
but I will never put anything out there that they haven't shared, or that they don't feel safe,
Yeah.
sharing outside. So we do it through newsletter, we do it through email, we do it through annual report
Yeah.
for our organization. We do it in spaces. We have an upcoming event next week where we're doing in panel presentations where women get to come in and share their stories. So yeah, in all format, availability, uh, we'll do it. And thinking outside of the box too, right? Not staying within just one medium of sharing, but anything's possible.
Yeah. So, Frank, talk about where you come in this process. And specifically, I'd love to hear about, when the Y brings you in and they're showing you their storytelling and their communications. What are the things that you noticed early on? What are the things that you noticed that were strengths? What were the things that you noticed that, that perhaps were blind spots? And how did that shape the work that you do with them?
Great question. I want to say it to you in a couple of layers. I think the first one, so I've known Magdalena since she has started at the Y, which was in January of 2020, I believe. And so I never worked, I would say, directly with their clients. What I did was I wanted to help in two ways. One, I started a program called Ascending Leaders in Color. I've had few of their staff go through that. That's all about reclaiming their own stories as individuals, but in a collective group, which was incredible. And then what Magdalena periodically will do, because I told her about acid based language, how we talk about certain things, she'll usually run her communications, especially if it's like a year-end appeal letter, even the letter that she had just talked about the 4 women and their stories. She'll run it by me just to see whether or not it's asset based and it's leading with aspirations. So that's how I've kind of really worked with that. What I haven't done with YWCA, but I'm sure this will happen in the future, is I have a separate project and just briefly talk about it. But it's called Your Story, Your Terms. It's a framework on how to help people with firsthand accounts, first person stories, tell their stories. And so just very quickly, it's really 4 parts. And I'm doing this with the contract with the client right now. But it's really helping the client or helping the storyteller identify what they believe, identify what they've lived, identify what they want to change, and probably most importantly, what still stays theirs. Just as Magdalena said, it's very critical that we're not there to re traumatize, we're not there to reopen wounds. We want them to tell their stories in a way that is on their terms, but that they don't have to bear everything and say everything to create harm. The goal is to get the listener to understand what the situation is through storytelling, through their own story in a way that then helps themselves and helps the community.
How do you tell when you're hitting that line? Because it's, obviously it's subjective person to person, right? And there is that very tricky balance between telling a story that not just hits the reader or viewer emotionally, but also really helps them understand why the services that, in this case, the Y provides are so valuable, right? And you can't do that without letting them into a person's world to some degree. But you
Correct.
also have to figure out where is the point where, that person might be re-traumatized by this and where that person might be going beyond their comfort level. How do you figure out what that point is and how do you make sure that that's communicated with the person?
Yeah, I think this is really important because often clients, when I say clients, I'm talking about like the participants,
Yep.
They might feel an obligation to share their story because of how the organization helped them. So it's really the responsibility then of the organization to really identify, are they ready to tell their story? Are they, if they're still too close, or what parts of their story? And so I do feel your question is asking, how do you know? I think for me, it's I've seen participants cry. Even before they tell their story, and you're like, oh, they're really still close to their story. This project that I just mentioned a second ago, I probably had two people in there that are still very close to their story. And when we were practicing, one of them started to tear up and wasn't expecting it. So for me, it's just a reminder, you do not have to share every part of your story, share the parts that matter. Um, a bad practice in the past was, oh no, they got to see you cry. That's what's going to get the money. Not at the expense of that person. No way. And so just reminding them, consistently reminding them as they're practicing their story, say enough. You do not have to say more than you are comfortable with. And so to me, again, to answer your question, be ready, pay attention, uh, look at those nonverbal signs, especially. Those are the things that are going to help the participant maneuver through their story. But yeah, that's how I would look at it.
Yeah, and there's such a value to that preemptive informing these individuals of their rights in this situation to some degree,
Yeah.
right? And I think, especially for those of us who are doing storytelling regularly, I mean, whether it's weekly or daily or monthly, however often we do it far more frequently than an individual on the other side is being asked to share their story. So our familiarity with the process and our familiarity with, with where lines can be drawn and with what's okay and what's not okay, that is very different from somebody who is going through this for the first time, might have that sense, as you said, Frank, of almost owing it to the organization to help them out, right? And absolutely, the more we can do ahead of time to inform participants what is okay, and also not just what they can expect, but what they cannot expect, or what what they don't have control over, I think is helpful. One thing, for example, that I always try to share with people who aren't familiar with this is that once an organization puts out an email or a social media post with your story in it, they can't control the reaction to that. And they can't control, once it's out there, it's out there. And I think we have to be very honest with folks about what they can expect, and also what's beyond our control as storytellers. Frank, when you told me about Magdalena and when you introduced us in an email, you said something really interesting. Two things, actually. The first thing you said was that she practices ethical storytelling without calling it that, which I think is speaks to just the instinctual nature, or the instinctive nature with which you do it, Magdalena, and that's wonderful. And then, Frank, you also used a really specific term to describe the work you do with them. You said you look at their donor communications through a, quote, asset-based ethical storytelling lens. I would love for you to elaborate on what that means. I'd love to hear from both of you about this. Frank, we'll start with you, and then Magdalena will hear from you next.
Yeah. So some context. As I mentioned, I used to be a nonprofit executive director for a small organization, and we made some errors. We made some mistakes. And a lot of it was how we framed our year end appeals. We focused on all of the negative pieces of this certain person's story. She came across it after we didn't get her sign off on it. She got a hold of the letter and was furious, rightfully furious. She says, I told you all of these things about my life, and you focused on these negative aspects. And that has stuck with me, to this day. And so it was really important that, one, that I learned how to tell a participant's story that dignifies and honors them. And it doesn't mean that you avoid talking about the hard stuff. What it means is that you lead with their aspirations. So if I say a story like Jaime, Jaime comes from a place of poverty. He lives in a rundown apartment, versus Jaime wishes to be a doctor. Jaime wants to do these things in his life. And he lives in extreme poverty. It's just a way of reframing how we have these conversations because as listeners, our brains automatically go to certain places if it's in a deficit frame. We might feel pity, which is not the goal. We do not want our communities to be pitied. If I say at-risk youth, historically our brains are going to think, oh, they must be black and brown kids. So how do we use language in a way that again dignifies, that is asset based, that can talk about these issues but in a way that still, like I said, honors the community? That's how I approach asset frame language. So again, it could be, I just mentioned, you don't have to say at risk youth, just say youth. You don't have to say minorities, because honestly we're not. So you can still say things like just identify the groups, black population, brown populations. There's little simple shifts we can do in our language that disrupts the pattern the brain makes, which leads to better storytelling, in my opinion, which then is ethical storytelling.
And Magdalena, I'd love to hear your take on this when it comes to the specific storytelling and communications that you're doing at the Y. How does that inform the way that you write or the way that you present the stories that you're telling?
Well, we've been doing some learning ourselves. I'll be totally transparent, and that's where I do lean on Frank in reference to when we create a particular um, communication piece. We always and we shifted. We've shifted to including storytelling in our communication, where maybe prior we were just sending out facts. Oh, we met the needs of X number of women. We did this and so forth, and recognize that storytelling is very impactful. But how do you do it in a way where it's inspiring, right? And where the story teller, I guess, in this case, the individual were highlighting the story, so forth. When they read this piece of communication, feel empowered, feel good, not ashamed, not embarrassed, but really noting if their the power in their story as to how far they may become. Like Frank said, it's not about um, look at how poor I am and everything that I dealt with. We all are human. If we come from a humanistic perspective, we all have stories, and we don't need to put a color to them. We don't need to put a gender to them. There's just stories of resiliency, and so how do we do that when we share, those stories. And Frank, you, a couple of times when we've worked together, it's really about not, when we're sending communication to donors, it's not about making the donor feel great for what they're doing, but really sharing like the impact that their contribution has made on the individual, in moving them forward or opening opportunities for them and so forth. So I think I always ask, going back on the conversation earlier and talking about how stories come, we at the YWCA do not go out and seek stories. We're not consistently going to our clients and saying, hey, let me see, what's your story? I I think that the fact that we start building trust with them, we start sharing what we know with them, they eventually open up and share. And what they're sharing is not the hardship. What they're sharing is how far they've come because they've hit that point in their life where they've realized, oh my God, I did this. I did this regardless of everything that's coming at me. Um,
Yeah.
and those are the stories that we lean to. And it's like, well, tell me a little bit more. And that's how we know they're ready. They're ready to share because they reached that aha moment for them. I get excited when I see their faces and I recognize the story. Oh, I'm like, here it comes, because they've gotten to that point where they love themselves. They've, found their dignity. They found whatever that feeling may be, that they're ready. They're ready. And so to be able to ask them at a certain point, would you speak at a graduation? Would you be okay being highlighted in the newsletter that we have coming up or the annual report? For them is yes, because they're coming from a place of like, I want to share how far along I've come. And that's the story we want to tell.
I think so often when we talk about storytelling, and I do this all the time when I give workshops about video storytelling, I often say that, the first step to doing it right is to do it. And that there's very little downside to, shooting a quick 30-second testimonial video of yourself or behind the scenes video and posting it, right? And yet, I think there are quite a few storytelling skills that even for those of us who aren't doing it professionally, even if it's just people, and not just people, but if it's people who are on our staffs who are not instinctual storytellers and they are being asked to help find stories, right? There are a lot of skills that I think are really important to cultivate and that take time to cultivate. And what you both described, I think, is one of those skills. Figuring out how to tell stories that are engaging and that don't say necessarily that the problem is solved and that the issue that you address is, no longer an issue, but also doing so in a way that uplifts the people that we serve and doesn't try to create sympathy or try to in any way look down on it. I was giving a workshop a few weeks ago in Augusta, Georgia, and I showed a video. I showed a trailer that I did for a documentary. One of my last projects as a journalist was a documentary about student parents. So these were college students who were going to school while raising a child.
Mm.
And I played this trailer. It was about a minute and 45 seconds. And somebody raised their hand and asked a question about why I chose the music that I chose. And it wasn't maudlin music. It wasn't, a lot of teary eyed piano music. It was a little more ethereal. And one of the things I said was that because even in this short minute 45 trailer, I didn't want this to be a project where people were looking from the outside and felt in any way like they were looking down upon these individuals. Because what these individuals were and are doing is noble. It's incredible. They are serving as parents and bettering themselves, and that's nothing to look down on. In fact, if anything, it's something to admire. And so even the little choices like word choice, right? Like you were saying about using the term at-risk youth, but you still have to know how to the convey the situation without using terms that bring those innate reactions out in audience members. And so it's a real skill. And I think it's so important that both you, Frank, as an instructor of those skills, and Magdalena, you as somebody who leads a team and is shepherding stories, that you're obviously both so aware of that. And I think that's a huge, huge thing that nonprofit leaders across the country should really be aware of and take advantage of. Any other thoughts on that from either of you?
I agree.
Yeah.
So so I think, well, Magda said something that I wanted to bring to light again. She talked about it's not just about the acid base part of it. The other part that she said was how we talk to donors or any other, I don't know, stakeholder, that we're all part of this puzzle together. Uh,
Hmm.
not It's not the white savior complex. So how do you avoid that? And it is through language, and it is through song choice. In your example, Matt, it's how do we convey these messages that we're all in this together, that it's not an us versus them, or we need to help these people over here. We're all part of this community, and everybody plays a role in that, especially the participant themselves. So to me, those are really good reminders of just it's acid-based language, but it's also talking in an inclusive way that we're all part of this together.
Yeah.
I would love to hear, Magdalena, from you, especially on this. What are the biggest hurdles that you run into as you keep this approach? And, the biggest tension that you face, whether that's internally or whether that's, just how to toe that line between telling a powerful story and protecting your client. What are the biggest challenges that you face and how do you navigate them?
I think the biggest challenge is ensuring that we continue to provide um, trust and safety to our clients, and protecting that, and to always, you know, life happens, and we run our nonprofits, and we go, and you have so many stakeholders at hand that you want to respond, that you need to respond to. And so I think the biggest challenge is not to get lost in that, and to cause harm. And so, um, yeah, I think that's, we go, and sometimes we got to be able to catch ourselves and not take a story, right? And so it's always like not not taking stories for the heartbreak of the story, or not, but more for taking the honest stories, I guess. It's like honing in on what is being shared, and with honesty and trust, and also protecting the client, and kind of knowing as much as you can when they're ready and when they're not ready. And so that's, I think, the hardest thing, because storytelling is healing. And that's
Yeah.
one of the things that we hope to give a lot of our participants and the women that come through our programming, is healing. At the same time that they're trying to maybe gain a skill or launch their small businesses, they're healing. And storytelling brings that about. And so, how do we continue to create spaces where they can share with each other, and create those bonds with each other, recognizing that they're not alone? And as leaders ourselves, being aware when the right time is. And that's a challenge, um,
Mm.
when you're sometimes being pushed to,
Yeah,
realize
absolutely.
stories.
And then, Frank, of course, you work with Magdalena at the Y. You work with clients nationwide. You speak at nonprofit conferences nationwide. And those presentations are always a highlight and an event. If you ever have the chance to see Frank in your city, buy the ticket and do it, because he is outstanding and it's just such a riveting speaker. I would ask you a very similar question, just, kind of from the outside view. Obviously you have a large network of folks in the nonprofit space, and so many folks you communicate with. What are the biggest questions that they bring to you when it comes to ethical storytelling, and what are you telling them?
I think, I don't know if I have a biggest question. I think it's more of a theme. It's just a lot of the clients I work with, they just want to do it right. And often they just don't.
Mm.
So just giving them certain tools, doing, again, you saw the list of like asset-based language, what that looks like versus deficit frame language. So I think I don't know if this is me projecting it. I don't think it is, but I want to say that, well, I mean, I guess I hope I'm projecting it, that people, they they want to do the best. They want to do the best by their clients. They want to do the best in how those stories are told. They want to make sure that all of those things are happening. And so I lead with that. Like, I know that they're not creating stories purposefully with harm. It's a realization that the story has been told historically with harm. And then it's like, okay, all right, well, how do we stop doing that? And so then just giving them the belief and the care and the love that, look, this is what was, but it doesn't have to stay as is. We actually have an opportunity to change how the stories are told. And as I said earlier, that really is a disruption in the brain because we're not used to it. So even like, I love your example with the music, like people that disrupted their brain. They're like, wait, what? And your response was beautiful. It's like, this isn't about a pity story. These are uplifting stories. So just a simple change in music choice, simple change in words,
Mhm.
that is what I feel thematically people, nonprofit storytellers want to tell the stories authentically and with trauma-informed care. So that's what I see. It's not a big question. It's they just want to do it right and they want the tools.
It's that need to give ourselves grace as we grow.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean,
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
no, absolutely. That's why I usually share when I'm presenting. I'll share the mistakes I've made. I've actually had full slide decks of mistakes that I've made, and that's to help the people in the audience understand. Look, even the presenter's made his mistakes. So that doesn't mean it's the end of the world. It just means we can restart and we can do better.
Yeah.
Magdalena, Frank, I have so enjoyed this conversation. I need to have multiple guests more often. This was great. I am, before we close out, I'm going to ask you that famous last question all reporters love to ask. Is there anything we haven't talked about that you would like to add? Magdalena, we'll start with you.
Oh my God. No, I think that I would just say, for those that are working on storytelling, um, like we mentioned, that give yourself grace. It takes time. It takes learning. It takes a couple of stumbles, knee scrapes, but get back up um, and move forward. I think that as long as you are building trust, that you're slowing down to listen, and that you see that storytelling is a partnership, you're just going to be, you're going to be great. In being the tool or the platform by which your clients can shine.
Leaning on each other, the storytellers on our team and the people who we serve and who are sharing their stories so beautifully with us. Thanks so much, Magdalena. Frank, last question for you. Anything that you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think I just want to reemphasize, I think often in the space of nonprofits, we capture the stories of the client and then tell the story. But there's a lot of organizations that will ask their clients to tell their own stories, let's say like at a gala event or something. That's the part where that's one of my skill sets, is to help that person then tell their stories in that venue. So I would just say, if anybody out there needs that type of assistance or works with a lot of clients where they have them tell their own stories, I think I would love to get in touch with them, simply because of the fact that we don't often look at it from that lens. And we want to make sure that that person is telling their story in a way that is trauma informed, that is helpful, but that they also know that they own their story on their terms.
He is Frank Velásquez, and she is Magdalena Verdugo, the CEO of the YWCA of Southern Arizona. You can find her and the Y at ywcatucson.org. You can find Frank and For the Hood at forthehood.com. Magdalena and Frank, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
And that is episode 16 of .org. If you found this helpful and want others to hear it too, a great rating or review wherever you get your podcast goes a long way. Please take the time if you can. And check out my work at Pearl Impact Media. Video storytelling can be so beneficial for organizations. I would love to work with yours. Book a free consultation right now at pearlimpactmedia.com. All right, friends, I am Matt Pearl. This has been .org. Thank you for listening. See you next time.